Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And friends, we're going to talk about your finances, all things related to your small business, budgeting, and bookkeeping. And before you hit stop right now, because you're like, nah, no, not interested, please, I encourage you to hang on, because I've got the right guests to hopefully help us simplify all of this and get us in the right position for the new year. We're going to simplify how to budget like a pro, specifically for your small business, and really set yourself up for success in the new year. My special guest today is Mark Butler. He's the founder of the accounting startup Let's Do the Books. He's a bookkeeper, a CFO, and a confidant to top online entrepreneurs, people like Brooke Castillo of the Life Coach School. Before working in finance, Mark co-founded 3 online businesses that brought in close to $2 million in total revenue. So I guess he knows what he's talking about, right? Mark combines his business savvy with a certification in life coaching that really helps business owners take control of their finances and work through any shame or anxiety that, well, let's be real, it tends to come up when we're dealing with money. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Mark Butler. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Mary, thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad you're here, and I hope that you will geek out and talk about numbers a bit with me today. Again, it's not going to be dry and boring. We're really going to get into the brass tacks of things. So, any small business owner that has gone into what they're doing, jumped off the corporate 9-to-5, a lot of times they have walked into this without a business degree, without any sort of formal training when it comes to finance. So what would be your first bit of advice, your very first step when we're talking about budgeting like a pro for those guys?
You know, it's funny you say that because I don't even have a college degree, and I don't have any formal accounting training or bookkeeping training. I kind of fell into my business. So I'm in the same boat as those people that you're describing.
Yeah.
It's funny, the biggest or most basic, probably biggest and most basic piece of advice I would give people who are just trying to figure out their finances in their business is to separate their business finances from their personal finances.
Absolutely.
First and foremost. And I think that might seem obvious. It also might seem trivial, but what I have found is that when people don't treat their business as its own distinct entity with its own needs and its own priorities and its own kind of goals, then the water does get muddied between business and personal, and it can be very difficult to look at the business as its own thing and decide what it needs and how the money should be used in that entity. So that's actually my step one, most basic thing. Checking account for the business, credit card for the business if you want to use a credit card, PayPal account for the business, and then let the business money stand on its own. That's number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's a side hustle or, a hobby that you're thinking about starting into a business right from day one, I think that's fundamental. And I think that a lot of times people kind of get scared with that of like, oh, do I have to register it as an LLC? Do I have to do this, and that? And all the fear sort of stops them. They go, well, let's just begin. Let's just start, What would you say to that person?
I would say I totally understand the fear. Because you do wonder, well, do I need to have a tax pro? Do I need to have a certain type of entity? What's the best way to do this? And I would say you want to consult a tax pro. But in the meantime, even if you don't set up a formal, official business checking account, if it's just another account where you have your personal accounts, that's fine. What you're doing is you're just partitioning your money.
Yeah.
That's all. You're acknowledging the business as its own thing, giving it its own account. It doesn't have to be official. You don't have to have an employer identification number, although that's relatively easy to get, and I would encourage you to do it.
For sure.
But in the meantime, create an account, call it business account or whatever, put some money in there to fund the new business, and then let it operate independently.
Right.
You will thank yourself.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's what is the statistic? That 90% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years, typically because of cash flow. And cash flow is fundamental in understanding what's coming in and what's going out and how it trickles in or how it gushes out. And there's no way to sort that easily when it's in your personal bank accounts, for sure. So, okay, so now you've taken that step, you've gotten it separated, you have even taken the step of getting a bookkeeping software, say Xero or QuickBooks or something of the like. What's the step after that?
Well, actually, I think tools like Xero and QuickBooks are probably overkill for the average person who's just really getting started. If we're talking about she's in her first days, weeks, or even months of her new venture, QuickBooks and Xero might be more tool than she needs. Now, sometimes people sign up for those because they have invoicing features and they think, well, I'm going to have to send clients invoices anyway. I might as well bundle those things up. That's totally understandable. But on the accounting side, something as simple as getting your transactions into QuickBooks or Xero, even though they're supposedly going to connect to your bank account, that doesn't always work that well. And I have seen too often that people will run into confusion and overwhelm with the tools, and then that makes it too easy to avoid the money. They say, well, it's too complicated. I'm just not going to deal with it right now.
Right.
So in the early days of a venture, I'll point people in one of two directions. I'll either say, use a very basic spreadsheet, use a Google Sheet. You can keep it so dead simple. In fact, if people want to write this down, I just had a call the other day with a person who I haven't interacted with in a long time, and she said, hey, I'm still using the spreadsheet you gave me. She's got a very successful little coaching practice, but I said, here's the spreadsheet. It's going to have just a few columns. It's going to have a date column for when the transaction happens. It's going to have a column called payee, and that's sort of the other participant in the transaction. So it could be you if you're getting money, or it could be the vendor if you're paying money out.
Yep.
You'll have a memo column, and that's just a note about the transaction. And then you'll have an amount. And if it's money you're paying out, the amount is negative. And if it's money you're receiving, the amount is positive. And then you could have one last column, and that could be account, and it's the actual bank account or credit card account where the transaction is happening. I'm telling you that if the average newer business owner would just fill something like that out consistently, this is a great tool if you have, say, fewer than 10 transactions per month.
Yeah.
At the end of the year, if you were to take that spreadsheet and nothing else and give that to your tax preparer, you'd blow their mind with how on the ball you are. Because they can take that, they can do the math, they can sum things up, they can look at categories, they'll take care of that for you. If you just have a record of all your transactions in that simple a form, you'll actually be just fine. Now, the next step up in complexity from something like that is a tool that's not even really meant for business finances. It's called You Need a Budget. It's personal budgeting software.
Yep.
It's actually what I use to run the finances for all my clients, everybody from people who are just getting started to people who are doing millions of dollars per year. Because in simple cash-based service or product or course businesses, it is totally sufficient. It makes the management of the transactions very easy. And so I'll just keep all the transactions in there. And then if I need to do any manipulation, or if a tax professional needs to do manipulation, I can export it to a spreadsheet, make some nice reports, or let the tax preparer make some nice reports, and I'm good to go. So Xero and QuickBooks are really powerful tools, really great tools. They're intimidating.
Yeah.
And unless you really want to hire a bookkeeper in the early days, I would say, let's see if we can find you a simpler solution first.
Well, and that's the reason you're on the show in particular, is that when your PR person reached out to us and said, oh, Mark has come from You Need a Budget. And it's funny enough that You Need a Budget is something, it's a tool I've been using for probably about 6 months now or so myself.
Oh, okay.
But I'm only using it on the personal side. I've got Xero for my business and have done for years and years and years. Yeah, excellent tool. Side note to anyone who's listening, all the links and all the things that we talk about in today's episode will be in the show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com. Highly recommend You Need a Budget. It's fun, it's simple, it's intuitive and easy to track. Again, money going in and money going out and putting them into those particular buckets and things. But I think that a lot of our listeners are beyond the kind of launching place. They're probably in kind of like the 4 to 7 year mark. So, having a bookkeeping system is already well within their wheelhouse. But you had talked about previously to me, the importance of really taking an audit of your chart of accounts. The chart of accounts, side note for anyone who doesn't know, are the buckets for money in and the buckets for money out. So tell me about why it's important to do an audit of the chart of accounts.
Well, as I told you earlier, I didn't come into this world as a trained accountant. And so that actually benefited me because I didn't have a sense of what a traditional chart of accounts would look like if a, quote unquote, real accountant set it up.
Right.
What I did instead is when I would set up my own chart of accounts, or you might call it a category list, or as you said, a list of buckets. These are all functional names for what we're talking about here. Then I approached it with my mindset as a business owner, and I thought, what do I need to see in front of me in order for the clarity to stay high and the quality of my decisions to stay, perfect, or not perfect, but really high quality decisions. And so I would just lay out my categories in a way that made sense to me. So I would have sort of a category for each type of revenue that I generate. Maybe I sell some courses, maybe I sell some services.
Yep.
Maybe I sell retreats. Each one of those things is going to be broken out in my financial tracking. I'm also going to do things like every team member that I work with, they're probably going to have their own line in my chart of accounts, because yes, as a group, in my case, my bookkeepers and my right-hand person in the business, I could look at them just as a broad category of sort of labor expense.
Yep.
But I want to have pretty easy visibility on how much money I'm paying to each one of those people. It's the same thing with something like subscriptions. So you've got your MailChimp or your ConvertKit or whatever tool you happen to be using. You have web hosting. You have a lot of different pieces of software that make your business easier to run. Instead of lumping those all into one category called software, I like to lay them out individually so that, again, at a glance, I can say, oh, that thing's $50 a month. That thing's 10. They add up to $300 a month, let's say.
Yeah.
But if I'm trying to decide where in my business can I tweak and fine tune a little bit, I want it to be easier, not harder, to see where the money's going. So I lay these things out in much more detail than the average bookkeeper, I've been told. I've showed my work to kind of other bookkeepers and accountants, and they say, actually, this is great. It's a lot more detail than I need. And I said, yeah, I totally understand. And we can always roll it up to sort of category totals like labor or software or revenue, these kinds of things.
Right.
But I want the detail available to me at a glance so that it improves my decision-making and my clarity.
And that's a very good point. I remember right at the beginning of lockdown in England, gosh, I mean, this was March. So I quickly did an assessment of just auditing all the outgoing expenses and every single thing, in a spreadsheet and line itemed it out. And that helped us to have a 50,000 foot view of the money and go, okay, right. Well, if we're going into a lockdown situation, where can we shave? What is absolutely essential in running the business, taking things over, servicing our clients, all of that. And it really significantly helped us shave quite a bit of our overhead. So much so, I think The Guardian even wrote an article about how the Simplifiers does it, just to kind of relay and share it with other people. And it's not rocket science. It really isn't. And I think the tendency for a lot of small business owners, and I'll put my hand up and say I used to be in that bucket as well, is it is big and scary. And you go, the bookkeeper will handle that. My CPA will figure it out. And you've got like a box full of receipts shamefully underneath your bed somewhere. Yeah. And you just want somebody else to figure it out because you're like, I'm not really a pro at this. But yeah, I mean, as you say, like looking at it is incredibly important and have that clarity, right?
Yes, it gives you that clarity. And something I hope people understand is that this isn't always about cutting expenses. It's about clarity about where your money is going, because you'll discover as you do one of those audits, one of those reviews, you'll say, that thing that I'm spending money on, whether it's a team member or a piece of software or an educational program or whatever it is, it'll be an opportunity for you to remind yourself of how valuable and important it is. And you might even look for ways to increase spending on those kinds of things because of the leverage that they create in your business.
That's right.
So all of this is about raising awareness. Sometimes that increased awareness will lead to reduction in expenses. Sometimes that increased awareness will lead to an increase in expenses because they're beneficial sort of business growing expenses. And I think that's important to know and to note. We're not just trying to reduce, and pinch pennies. We're trying to create a business we love.
Yeah.
And financial awareness will help us do that.
Huge, huge. And I think that even, as you say, if it's a smaller business that has only, say, 10 transactions a month, having that kind of high level clarity of where the money is going starts to help you see the trends of things. March is a real big month where money goes out the door, but April's a big month where money comes in the door. And then start to build that foundational knowledge of what cash flow is in the first place, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So looking back at 2020, my goodness, you deserve a trophy if you're listening to this now and you survived. Well done, you. It was such an unpredictable year for quite a few of us. How would you suggest we plan wisely for the year ahead, specifically as it relates to our budgeting?
I think this is a year that probably taught us all the benefit, the power of having cash reserves.
Definitely.
And I want to acknowledge that all of us are at different stages in our business, and no one should ever feel judged, criticized, or shamed if they don't have a big cash reserve, because sometimes, your life has needs in it, and it doesn't allow for the creation of this big surplus. But this is a year where we realized, okay, I never can quite tell if there's going to be some external shock that's completely outside of my control and might even be happening at a worldwide level that significantly impacts my ability to earn money.
Yeah.
So I think that one thing this will help us all do going forward is as we think about pricing our services and delivering our services, as we think about our costs, maybe we'll acknowledge to ourselves that one cost we have in all of our business budgets is something called preparation for a rainy day, preparation for some big external shock.
Yeah.
We don't know when it's coming. We don't know how big it will be, but we know that expense exists in our business, and we can start sort of paying that expense today.
Yeah.
So that's been one of the biggest takeaways for me this year is my clients I really only had one client who, he just didn't have significant reserves in place that were available to his business. And so when we kind of all went into lockdown in March, he immediately had to start laying off a pretty decent percentage of his team members.
Yeah.
Whereas clients who had a relatively big reserve, they had enough space to breathe and to say, okay, I can take the next 4 or 6 weeks to evaluate and figure out what my plan is because there's plenty of cash on hand. Because of this principle of having cash on hand, I was able to have a couple of conversations with clients where they just texted me and said, am I okay? Am I going to be okay?
Yeah.
How quickly and how significantly do I need to respond to this lockdown? And I was able to say, look, we have funded everything we care about 30, 60, 90 days in the future. So all you need to do right now is breathe and think and get creative and figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel pressure to do anything drastic today. And that's a huge benefit.
That's huge. And, again, I think that when you have, you feel informed, you have clarity on your numbers, you make decisions from a place that isn't fear-based. You aren't,
Right.
Pivoting so fast and so hard to something completely different and completely out of your wheelhouse, feeling pressure to bring revenue in. You're making strategic decisions and looking, I suppose, at not only the short term, but the 12 months ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the kind of thing that once you arrive at some, 3 months or 6 months or 12 months worth of cash in the bank sort of set aside for reserves, yes, of course, that feels amazing. But what I've also observed in myself and others is as soon as you acknowledge that need in your business with any amount of money, could be $100, that you set aside and say, that's the reserve, you feel an instant payoff kind of in confidence and reduced stress. But also there's something almost magical about doing that because once the money is there and you let yourself get excited about it, you start to prioritize it. You start to get excited about growing it.
Yeah.
And it probably won't take you as long as you think to arrive at a reserve amount that actually makes a big difference in your business and your life.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's the big lesson of 2020. You're absolutely right. Putting a little bit of money away into reserves bit by bit, month by month. And it does grow and it is exciting. And, I think that we always feel, no matter how big or small our business is, 5 figures, 6 figures, seven beyond, that it's not enough.
Yeah.
And I think that not enough, we have to squash immediately because, as you say, I mean, even if it is $100 or £100 here and there, it grows. And then that is that boost of, the happy, good feelings in your brain and all of that you're actually doing something productive and not
Yeah.
falling into the same trap. So, I mean, kind of none of us know. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball of what 2021 is going to be. But in my head, I also imagine, our business will take a slightly different approach to budgeting this year. And maybe look at like two different budget scenarios. One where the world reopens, a vaccine comes in second quarter or beyond, and then maybe one where it doesn't and lockdowns happen again, either, in March or April of 2021 and another one in fall. And how does that change what we are launching and rolling out month by month, and also taking us a better look at where the money's going out every single month? Do you think that's wise?
I do think that's wise. I think it's funny because I think that in a COVID world, entrepreneurs are having to do the same thing we've always done, which is kind of try to predict the future and act based on our best guess about what the future is going to look like.
Yeah.
Now, in this case, I think our business planning would probably be best if we sort of assume that in-person things are going to be tough, maybe even impossible. That's probably a safe assumption for the foreseeable future. But I think that it makes sense to have a couple of different budgeting scenarios or forecasting scenarios where we're saying, well, this is what life will look like if everything goes great in the vaccine and everything else. And this is what life will look like if we stay exactly as we are now.
Yeah.
And I would sort of expect to spend as though it's the lockdown scenario. And I would do marketing and sales as though world is going back to normal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really wise. And, bottom line, we all know this, but sometimes we forget, is that the most important thing in this equation is really, truly knowing and listening and asking your ultimate ideal clients where they struggle the most, what they need now, what they think they might need in 6 months from now that you can deliver on and deliver well. I think with budgeting, sometimes we get so wrapped up into us, like what I need, what money needs to come into our bank account in order for us. But I think that there's a reverse, that could be very beneficial in this conversation. And that this is the time really to be surveying our audience, our email lists, our clients.
Yeah, I totally agree. Long before COVID ever hit, for 7 years now, business owners have been coming to me and saying, I've got money issues. I've got to figure out the money piece. I've got to figure out my spending. I've got to figure out my budgeting. And I always say, yes, of course. And in every scenario, a little bit more awareness of the cash and where it's coming from and where it's going, maybe a little bit tighter budgeting. Yes, that's beneficial. But honestly, Mary, what I almost always discover is when people come to me thinking they have big money management issues, it's more often true that they have marketing and sales issues.
Interesting. So tell us more.
Well, they think, I'm wasting a lot of money. I've got to get the money thing figured out. And that's why I'm having feast and famine. It's got to be because of the money piece. And I'll go into their numbers with them. I'll go into their business with them and I'll show them like, look, let's just have a very dispassionate discussion of your expenses, for example. Walk me through these expenses. Which one of these seem optional to you?
Yeah.
And what I find is that people can be very hard on themselves and say, I'm bad with money, I'm wasteful, I have a bunch of money leaks in my business. And when we go through it, we'll uncover that maybe they could cancel this $10 membership and that $40 subscription.
Yeah.
And we'll clean up the expenses a little. Maybe we'll find that they have spent a little more on travel or a little more on coaching than they thought they would.
Yeah.
But when we really look at things that drive feast and famine, it tends to be that they're not as consistent in their marketing and sales habits. And the downstream effect is feast and famine. So that's why I say sometimes they think they have a money management issue, and what they really have is a marketing issue.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And one of the things that we started to do years and years and years ago, and it's really been beneficial for us, and it sounds so simple, but it truly is a secret that works for our team, is, create a spreadsheet. And you can do it on a whiteboard, you can do it in a Google spreadsheet or otherwise, but do it with your team where, every row is a month, January, February, March, April, May, all the way down. And then, look at that next step and say, okay, well, in January, what are we talking about? What are we launching? In February, what are we talking about? What are we launching? And the next column after that is, what do our clients need the most?
Yeah.
What are they struggling with in the month of January, in the month of April, and in the month of September? And that truly is what you're speaking to, of understanding very clearly what our marketing message is. And that dictates everything, for our podcast, that dictates what topics we are releasing on those certain months, because that's exactly what our listeners need, what we believe they need. And it's not just a guess, it's true with, validating with surveys and asking them outright. And I think that does, when you do that step, it sort of seems obvious to say it out loud, but then, the second part, the bonus part, is you match your cash flow forecast with that. You say, okay, April's a big month where our clients really need us, and they're going to be really eager to buy the thing that will help them with whatever they're struggling with at that month. And you match up and say, okay, well, leading up to that big launch, we have, marketing expenses in February and March that are higher than usual, and mapping it out the same way. That's the secret, isn't it?
It really is the secret. And to that point, when I say that often issues that people think are related to money are more likely related to marketing, to be very specific, they're more likely related to traffic. So sometimes I'll ask people, or they'll say, we've just had our best quarter ever, or something like that.
Yeah.
And now we want to repeat that or grow that in the next quarter or in the next year. And I'll say, that's great. Again, me being the money guy, they're asking me, what should we do with our money? And I always say, hold on. If we think about the auditorium, the virtual auditorium that your business exists in, something happened. That auditorium was full, and then you made your offer, and some percentage of those people accepted your offer. As the money guy who counts the money after it arrives, I want to know what you're doing to refill the auditorium with fresh faces to make that offer to.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have fresh faces in that auditorium, it's not going to go as well. And you might at that point think, well, our offer was off, or our pricing was off, or something else was off. And usually when I talk to people and I sort of dig into this with them, what I find is that they've got a great offer because they just sold it very successfully. They just don't have enough new faces in the room that they can make that offer to. So that's not really, it's the pipeline. It's not really my expertise, but it's funny how often people come to me thinking they have cash management problems. And I just point out to them, well, it sounds like actually you're standing on stage. There just aren't very many people in that auditorium that you can make your offer to. That's what's really going on in this business.
That comes back down to your funnel. So at the very, very top of your funnel, you got lots of people as they come through whatever process or trickle that you have to the point where they're making a decision at the end of the funnel. Are there enough bodies in the funnel to create the conversion rates that you have had in the past? Absolutely. Yeah. So I love that. I love that you talk about what you see from a bookkeeper's point of view, but also from a strategist's point of view as a CFO of, when it comes to money, a lot of times we just want to delegate it off to the pro and go, you figure it out. I'm going to go over here and do the things that I love to do the most, the creative work. I'm curious, let's change gears a little bit here. So we talked about budgeting, we talked about different scenarios, but I want to talk about luck. You mentioned this in a previous conversation that we had. What role does luck play in budgeting and running a small business from your point of view?
In my opinion, luck plays a much bigger role than people probably want to admit or to think about. The tricky thing about luck is people who have been very successful often get defensive about having their success attributed to luck.
Yeah.
And people who have not yet had the success they want, if they say, well, luck is a factor, then they seem like they're trying to make excuses.
Right.
So luck becomes this tricky topic, but I've just been in enough businesses now where I can look at luck very dispassionately and say, here's the thing. I've worked in these several businesses. They all got started at approximately the same time. Their output is approximately similar. The quality of their work is great, but this person achieved X and this person achieved 100X.
Yeah.
And when you really sort of pick it all apart, not in a critical way, but just in a curious way, what you discover is that there is an unknown factor here. And I don't know what to call it other than luck. There's some timing to it. There's what was the preparation of the entrepreneur in their previous life, what brought them to where they are. All of these things come together. What was the timing that they had with their particular marketing channel? Did they happen to catch a wave with a new medium, a new platform that rocketed them ahead? And I think these things are a factor. So I never say it because I'm trying to discount a person's success, because she did the work that allowed her to benefit from the luck.
Yeah.
And I'm also never saying it in a way that I would want to make an excuse for a person she's not doing the work that would allow her to take advantage of whatever luck happens to arrive.
Yeah.
But I think it's only rational to say luck is a big factor, not necessarily in our long-term results, but definitely in our short-term results.
Yeah.
So on the short of the time horizon, like if we're talking a year or even a couple of years and under, luck plays a much bigger role than most people think. On a 5-year plus time horizon, the impact of luck, I think, shrinks. But I think too many people are beating themselves up because they feel like they're not, quote unquote, keeping pace with some of their peers or friends. And if I really dig into what's going on in those two businesses, if I'm looking at the two of them side by side, I end up mostly only being able to point to luck as a differentiator.
And, I think that the easy excuse that some of us can fall into of like, well, I just need to work longer hours. I need to work harder. I need to buy into this hustle and grind mentality that's being shoved down a lot of our throats as online entrepreneurs. And I think that people are starting to wake up to that. I hope. As a simplifier, that's every day, all day I talk about, really it's in fact doing less, doing smart, surrounding yourself with practitioners and contractors and employees who are smarter than you in various aspects of your business. So again, you can gain that clarity, make wise decisions, and take calculated risks. I think that's a part of it. I think any luck that the Simplifiers has had over the last 17 years of business really came from being clear, having clarity on decisions, and then being brave to just simply ask, whether it's collaborations with like-minded entrepreneurs or, asking for the big sale with larger clients. There's a bit of courage that goes into this as well, right?
Absolutely. Courage and consistency.
Yes.
You just said it. I mean, 17 years. Over a 17-year period in a sort of expertise-driven, personality-driven business.
Yeah.
17 years of applying that same hard work is going to absolutely produce a result. So speaking of the hustle culture, I understand, that maybe it's kind of passing now, but over the last few years, we've seen how hustle, work. And I can't say that that's wrong or right. It doesn't match up with me personally, but I can say that I've had the privilege of working inside so many successful businesses. And I can only think of one where hustle is, I would say, definitely the sort of the ethos of the business. And that's the business that struggles the most in my sort of client portfolio. My clients who have achieved amazing incomes and amazing lifestyle, they never hustled.
Yeah.
They always worked. They worked hard. They worked very consistently. They were in tune with their audiences, as you pointed out earlier. They put in the effort and they were brave in making, in making the big ask. but they were never really burning the midnight oil.
Yeah.
That just wasn't part of what got them where they are. It was value transfer with their audience and consistency over a period of time. And that's it.
It's so smart. And, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I want to get to that place. I don't want to be working till 2 o'clock in the morning tonight. I want to make a change. And I think that a lot of the key points that Mark mentioned today make a lot of sense. So in the month of December, really give yourself the gift of getting off the hamster wheel and taking this episode, go back and listen to it again, press pause, and do the work, mapping out the 12 months ahead, thinking about and going beyond thinking and actually documenting where's the money going, like tracking the expenses, whether it's a spreadsheet or in your Xero or a QuickBook account, and then start to build that foundation of knowledge. So when you look ahead to the next year, and if we go into another lockdown in March, you're well equipped. You already are one step ahead of the game. It's not being sideswiped. Is there any final thoughts that you would share? Anything we haven't covered when it comes to budgeting like a pro?
I think the last thing I would say is put your money to work. So proactively think about, what do I want to have in my business and my life, and how can I direct dollars toward that thing?
Yeah.
And as you start to give it that level of attention, you'll start to see those results coming to you, because that attention really does pay off and compound in the long term.
So if you're curious about what Mark's talking about, I highly recommend checking out his website, letsdothebooks.com. He and his team are friendly bookkeeping for coaches and freelancers. So if that is you and you're looking for somebody to run alongside you and help you with the money side of understanding and getting your books in good shape for the year ahead, go check them out. Letsdothebooks.com is the website. So, Mark, I have a few questions as we wrap up, and I could talk about budgets all day long, so I have to shut it down at some point. But first off, thank you for your time. My first question for you is this, and I love to ask these questions of all guests that come on. Tell us, what's one book or blog you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
In the last couple of months, I've read this book 2 or 3 times. I've been really, really impressed with it. It's a book called The Psychology of Money. The author is named Morgan Housel, I believe. And here's why I appreciate his book so much. What I have found as I've read personal finance books and business finance books over the years is that for all the good that they offer, they can't quite seem to not push their dogma on you. And I'm one who really believes that money doesn't have to have any particular dogma. It doesn't have to have, there's no truly right or wrong when it comes to budgeting or spending or things like that. In The Psychology of Money, Morgan does such a good job of just saying, let me give you some mental frameworks. Let me help you think about your money so you can discover what your best path is. And I really appreciate it. It's a book I want to start giving away, and it's one that I personally have gone through probably 3 times in the last 3 months. So I've found it excellent.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll link that up in the show notes. I've not actually heard that book, so thanks for the recommendation there. So tell us, who is somebody in your network, somebody you know personally that you just feel is up to brilliant things? We could shine a spotlight on him, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have him on the podcast.
The person that I want to share with you is, I don't know whether she would describe herself as a coach at this point, but her name is Tara McMullen. And she runs a community called the What Works community. It used to be called the Co-Commercial community. And she's a person that I've masterminded with as a client. She's sort of been an advisor to me over the last couple of years. And I just think Tara is so insightful, so generous, and she operates with such integrity that she's been a person that has just been a pleasure for me to interact with her. I'd say going back 3 or 4 years now. So Tara McMullen from the What Works community.
Brilliant. We'll link her up in the show notes. If people are curious about her, you guys can check her out there as well. The Simplifiers podcast.com. So I believe that gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
I have been thinking about this. I am so grateful to live in a country and in a world where people like us have the opportunity to create an income that's really well suited to our personalities and our preferences. The the idea of a 40-hour work week for its own sake, it just never made sense to me. Not that I thought I was too good for it. It's not that I think I'm above the work. It's that one weird rule of we work 40 hours a week and we work them between sort of 9 and 5. I never understood it. So I'm really grateful to operate in a world now where I can create value, create great relationships, and earn a living with so much freedom and flexibility in my day. It's my number one value is autonomy and flexibility. And I'm really grateful to have those as sort of like the cornerstone of my professional life these days.
I can 100% agree to that. You preaching to the gospel choir in the back row here. I absolutely agree. And there's never been a better time to run a service-based business, in my opinion. You don't need a big fancy office. You don't need a big, huge staff to do the things. Technology has caught up with us in order to have clients all over the world. So if you have been thinking about starting something new, and take this moment, take this month to really put that foundational framework together, the budgeting part, the strategy part, researching and speaking to your prospective clients, and do the thing. So again, Mark's website is letsdothebooks.com. That's where you can connect with him and his team directly. Mark, I have a final question for you. And again, thank you for your time. Someone somewhere is listening to this episode right now and she's inspired. She's thinking, well, maybe this is possible. Maybe 2021 is exactly the right year for me to quit this corporate 9-to-5 job. Or, hey, who knows? They're probably going to lay me off in the next 30 days anyways. Better think fast, right? But she's scared, and she is that person who has had a box full of receipts underneath her bed. What's one thing you could just whisper into her ear right now to encourage her in this moment?
So with her money, what I want to tell her and everyone else is that it's probably not as big of a deal as you think it is. That even if you have not filed your tax returns for years, even if you owe the IRS a bunch of money, those aren't fun scenarios, but they're also not life-ending scenarios. Yeah. And if you just go about your creative work and add value to the world, those things sort themselves out over time. So pay attention to them, but don't let them bog you down because they don't need to. And when it comes to her business, I would just say, I'm a person who believes that success is guaranteed. And I don't say that like to me, it's not a slogan. To me, it's a mathematical reality that if I just keep iterating and if I just keep asking the person that I want to serve how I can serve them better, that they will tell me what I need to know in order to have a profitable relationship with them. So to me, success is guaranteed. It's just a question of how many iterations I have to go through and how much time that takes. But if I'm enjoying the process, I don't care how long it takes anyway. So just stay focused on the person you're trying to serve. Enjoy the work while you're doing it, and then let the success come because it will.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark, for your time. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mary.